The disturbing national trend, the school-to-prison pipeline, is the practice of pushing kids out of public schools and towards the juvenile and criminal justice systems. The practice is fueled by school funding cuts, high-stake tests that stress teachers, and the presence of police officers in schools. These conditions has resulted in the suspension, expulsion, arrest, referral to law enforcement or juvenile court, and the criminalization of children for behavior that should have been handled in school. Many of the youth that are funneled out of public schools are black or brown, have disabilities or histories of poverty, abuse, or neglect, and would have benefited from additional support and resources. For most students, the pipeline begins with inadequate resources in public schools, overcrowded classrooms, a lack of experienced or certified teachers and guidance counselors, insufficient funding for special education services, extracurricular activities, and well-equipped facilities lock many students into second-class educational environments that set them up to fail by neglecting their needs. This failure also causes students to have poor educational achievement, poor behavior outcomes, leading to an increase in disengagement, dropouts, and the risk of criminal justice involvement. All in all, neglected under-resourced public schools, especially ones in areas of concentrated poverty, simply don't receive the inputs they need to promote a healthy, sustainable educational environment, which negatively impacts students' behavior and performance. In addition to impacting students' behavior, the lack of sufficient resources in public schools also impacts the behavior of teachers and administrators. It creates incentives for them to remove children from school. Let me explain. Modern education was reformed by the No Child Left Behind Act, which I covered in my last video, and it includes the demand for greater accountability, standardized testing, adequate yearly progress, and harsh sanctions for underperforming schools. So this added a lot of pressure on schools to improve student test scores. As a result, schools who didn't have the resources and lost of trouble underperforming students were encouraged to funnel out these students to meet the demands set by No Child Left Behind. In essence, rather than addressing the systematic problems and lack of resources that led to poor test performance, schools took the easier road by suspending or expelling troubled underperforming students to encourage dropouts. Even worse, many of these under-resourced schools increase reliance on police rather than on teachers and administrators to remove children from school. These school police officers often had little or no training in working with kids, so school children were criminalized by school-based arrests for mostly non-violent offenses, such as talking back to teachers, skipping class, or being disobedient or disruptive. Not to mention, in some jurisdictions, students who have been suspended or expelled have no right to an education at all. In others, they just end up in inferior settings such as disciplinary alternative schools. And to be honest, alternative schools are terrible. They're immune from educational accountability standards such as minimum classroom hours and curriculum requirements, and fail to provide meaningful educational services to students who need them the most. As a result, struggling students return to the regular schools unprepared and are permanently locked into inferior educational settings and are funneled to juvenile detention centers. The school-to-prison pipeline is disturbing because in many cases, the kids that are suspended, expelled, or arrested are the same ones who had learning disabilities, history of poverty, neglect, or abuse, and would have benefited from additional resources and support in school, but instead were isolated, pushed out, and punished. What's also alarming about this is that there's a racial disparity in the pipeline. Black students were expelled or suspended 3 times more than white students. Some studies have investigated this to see why, but none were able to prove that black students misbehave more. They just showed that white students were more likely to be disciplined for provable, documentable offenses like smoking and vandalism, while black students were more likely to be disciplined for more subjective reasons like disrupting class. And not to mention, white teachers were the main ones disciplining black students. Some blame this on cultural deficit thinking, which leads teachers to have negative assumptions about the aspirations, ability, and work ethic of black students based on the assumption that they and their families don't care about education. And this is terrible because these racist perceptions create a stereotype that black students are disrespectful and disruptive, making them more susceptible to falling into the school to prison pipeline.